Everybody, and today we're going to be doing a presentation on what we call the MMDetection framework, which is essentially a set of tools that are used in the object detection practices. Since it is a presentation on a resource, we figured that it would be a good idea to create a presentation on the resource-rich level, in the sense that we'll be sharing with you a lot of links, a lot of information and a lot of access to resources that we found as a result of researching on the paper. So coming back to the level of the MMDetection framework, we have identified it as being quite useful when it comes to object detection, since it was primarily done for that purpose. Some of the features that MMDetection has is, first and foremost, it is a modular design. So it's almost thinking on a practical level as if it was written with an ArcParse library, in which you can decide which methods and which models you're going to use, and whether they do the job that you're intending them to do. By this definition, or by this extension, we also look at the multiple frameworks that are ready for you, pre-made and pre-trained out of the box. This saves time on the level of usage, but also creates an initial level of efficiency that that the user or the analyst can enjoy while using this framework. What is also interesting and important is that it is supporting both styles of the data set in terms of the COCO and VOC, and we have links to those that we'll share later with you on what these do specifically. I'm guessing it's kind of fairly familiar already, but we have more information about this, since like I said, we are making this resource rich. The supported frameworks, there is literally, if you go through the paper, there is literally one page, two double-columned page of all the frameworks that are supported. So we're not going to go through them in detail, because that would require a separate presentation and probably take 3 hours. But if you go to the paper, you'll see exactly, literally bullet pointed one page of the frameworks that are being supported here. Just generally, the single stage methods in the sense of detectors with simple model architectures, high performance, nothing, like I said, nothing too special about them, just different architectures that are supported. Some benchmarks when it comes to the frameworks that are supported. You can just quickly read through them. It supports a lot. Like I said, going through them in detail one by one would be an inefficient practice here. So I do encourage you strongly that you go through them and sort of familiarize yourself, at least with the ones that you might potentially find useful or pertinent to a particular project. In terms of the architecture, it is the same kind of architecture for both the training epochs and the validation epochs. It is for the single stage detectors. If you imagine the body, the human body really, it has the head, the neck and the backbone, and they do collaborate with each other in a linear fashion here in the single stage detector. In the two stage detector, it supports the two types of head. So again, if you're going with your imagination, you can easily see what it looks like. And the training architecture from start to finish, as you can see, it's a forward model whereby the training epochs are dissected, let's put it this way, into different hooks that support the training through the data. So, like I said, we'll be sharing a lot of resources. Sorry, my mouse is going crazy. We'll be sharing with you a lot of resources connected to it, how it works specifically. We think that this framework is so rich in details and so rich in frameworks themselves and models and methods that you can use here, that, like I said, going through them in detail would be an exercise of redundancy here. There are some benchmarks that are attached to it in terms of how the models are performing in different contexts, and this is something that Samta will discuss with you now. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. So these are the benchmark results for different methods as tested on MMDetection code base. So basically this paper is all about the tool and its benchmark. So these results they presented so that these can be used further for research, and these will act as benchmark results for those results. So if we see in this figure, so here they tested these models using 4 backbones as ResNet 50, ResNet 101, and ResNext. So this figure reports here the bounding box mean average precision and its inference speed for different models. So say for hybrid task cascade, so here we see 4 points, which basically defines that this has been trained for 4 different backbones. And again, in this figure, they report the mask mean average precision and its inference speed for these 4 models. So these results act as the benchmark results. Here they also performed and displayed the inference speed on different GPUs. So basically they displayed this on for 3 networks: faster RCNN, mask RCNN, and retina net. So, and if we see for faster and RCN basically has higher inference speed for most of the GPUs, and it has highest for Titan V. And here in this figure, they are basically showing as it also supports uh, distributed training. So training is almost linearly accelerated here. If we see as number of nodes increase, the inference speed also increases. And this experiment is basically on mask RCNN. And this is for ResNet 50 backbone. Here comes the comparison of different code bases. So different code bases that they compared with are mask RCNN, benchmark, Detectron, and simple det. And the paper claims that they achieved almost comparable or slightly better performance in terms of speed, memory, and average precision. So if we see here, we can see that in terms of training speed, it's performing almost equal to mask RCNN benchmark, and whereas it has better performance in terms of GPU memory as compared to Detectron and simple det. And also it has comparable results for average precision, be it for bounding box or the mask. The other experiment they performed was using the model retina net. So if we see here, it performs on retina net, it performs almost comparable to mask RCNN benchmark. And whereas in terms of memory usage, if we see, it performs better than Detectron and simple det. And here comes the comparison based on mixed precision training results. So mixed precision training is basically using both 16-bit and 32-bit floating types in a model during training so that it runs faster and uses less memory. So their target mainly in this tool's various implementations was to reduce the training time and basically to increase the training speed and reduce the GPU memory, which I see from the results. As we can see, they have achieved it as compared to other code bases if we have a look at this. So these are the results for this mixed precision training results. So at the end, they just gave few extensive studies about some of the parameters, hyperparameters, which they did not use in their implementations, but they just performed the experiments for reference of others. So it basically follows the default parameters that are used in Detectron code base. And so for other 3 parameters, so number 1 parameter, smooth L1 beta. So it is the smooth L1 loss that is usually used in object detection for bounding box regressors. So smooth L1 loss is basically you have some threshold beta. So if your mod x is, or absolute value for your x is less than beta, the loss would be activated is L2 loss, otherwise L1 loss. So default value for this loss, as we can see here in the table, is 1/9. And its performance is, it gives average recall of 57.1. So what they found through their experiments was, if we reduce this further, say to 1/15, they can see a performance increment of around 57.3 from 57.1. Next is allowed border. So this is a parameter. So while we train RPN, region proposal network, while we train that, we have some predefined anchors for each location on the feature map. So anchors are basically the bounding boxes of different sizes and different aspect ratios for each pixel on the feature map. So while training, we want to exclude some of the anchors. So usually this allowed border value is set to 0. That means any of the anchors that are exceeding the boundaries of image by more than this allowed border, so basically it acts as a margin, they can be ignored during the training. So usually it is 0. That means all of them are ignored. So through their experiments, they showed that if we just ignore this feature, that is set this value to infinity, then we can see an increment in the performance, say from 57.1 to 57.7. Then comes the next hyperparameter as negative positive upper bound. So while training, we sample the anchors. So positive anchors are the one that have some ground truth related to them, whereas negative anchors are the one that do not have any ground truth bounding blocks attached to them. For example, the ones that are associated with the background of the image, whereas positive anchors would be the ones that are associated with any object in the picture. So while training, to have a fixed size of batch in training set, we basically, in case we have less number of samples for positive anchors, we take samples from negative anchors. So usually it is set to infinity. So it means in case we don't have any positive sample, we take all the negative samples. So basically this defines negative to positive ratio. So through their experiment, they showed that if we have, we set this value to either 3 or 5, say to some number rather than setting it to infinity, we can see a slight increase in our performance. So all these parameters, they just perform these experiments and presented it as a study so that it can be helpful to other researchers. Yeah, so that's all about the paper. Any questions? Okay, so we'll be sharing the slides in the group, I guess.
Yes, and we have other resources that we'll share in terms of slides, some sort of references that I found on some of the techniques that are used in there, just for further development or further in-depth analysis of what's going on in there, and a couple other links that we found as a result of it. So everything will be shared with you.
I have a question.
Yep.
Have you tried this, the MMD? Like, can I see some code based on it?
We've shared the GitHub repository on the reading group spreadsheet. We haven't had the time, honestly, to actually play around with it and implement it ourselves in form of a demo, which was on our table, but we just couldn't, owing to the time constraints. But
all right, thank you.
It's something that we have considered.
Yeah, but there is like a demo on GitHub.
I think so. The entire code base is in there, and based on the code base, as well as based on this paper that we're presenting here now, we have also identified some of the other usages or implementation of this framework into different projects. So we'll be sharing all of this with you. So that serves like a patchwork solution to the fact that we didn't have the time for the demo, if you will.